A boy split across two countries, a teacher growing up alongside fascism in Europe, a playwright hailed as the king of a new form of theater, and a detective ready to solve a mystery once and for all. How are these things aligned? Well, they're all the same man. Said that last one, that's me. And how did they influence the world around us? I think it's time to reopen a case. Please join me as I unravel the mystery of Eugene Ionesco.
Okay. We ready? Yeah? Okay, let's do this. Eugene Ionesco was born Eugen Ionescu in Slatina, Romania on November 26, 1909, to a Romanian father and a French mother. At 1 year old, his family moved to Paris, France, and so he considered French to be his mother tongue rather than Romanian. He had a younger sister and an even younger brother who died as an infant of meningitis. In 1921, after his father, also Eugen Ionescu, had left to participate in the Romanian government affairs during World War I, Ionesco's mother moved him to La Chapelle-en-Thenez, a small French village, to help him recover from his recently contracted anemia. In the countryside, he experienced a moment of revelation, discovering in a flash of bright light that the world around him was full of meaningless actions and meaningless deaths. Pretty normal thoughts for a 12-year-old, right? Returning to Paris in the mid-1920s, he began to write more frequently, exposing himself to literature and creating appropriately literary images of children getting back at their parents in various riotous ways. His father arranged a divorce through his work in the Romanian government's police force and ordered his children returned to him. Returning to Romania, Eugene continued his education unimpeded, but why am I saying all this? Could this playwright truly be divinely inspired? Could that be the reason why he decided Sorry, detective, but I'll take it from here. What? That can't possibly be the standard for private eyes nowadays, mistaking simple matters of psychology for divine intervention. Now, let's see, yes. Ionesco's early life and most of his career is defined by his distrust of language. This is likely due to a series of factors, most of which spawned from his division between Romania and France. In both countries, his teachers aimed to convince him that their language was the most beautiful and the most powerful. His bilinguality allowed him to engage more effectively with both languages from an observer's perspective, breaking them down to their foundational elements easier. This distrust combines with the meaninglessness of the known world Ionesco discovered in his childhood to form a use of meaningless language in his plays. This is no clearer than in our first piece of evidence, our Exhibit A, La Cantatrice Chauve, or The Bald Soprano. First produced in 1950, and the first play produced by Ionesco, the Anti-Play, as it is subtitled, does not feature, at any point, a bald soprano. In fact, nobody even sings at all. The plot, if you can call it that, focuses on Mr. and Mrs. Smith, an English couple living in an English house one English evening. In fact, the play centers Ionesco's linguistic distrust through similarly repetitive means. As the play begins,
a middle-class English interior with English armchairs. An English evening. Mrs. Smith, an Englishwoman, is darning some English socks. A long moment of English silence. The English clock strikes 17 English strokes.
See what I mean? The play proceeds as you'd expect from this point. The Smiths report events to each other as though they didn't live together, like what they ate for dinner, and meet with the Martins, another married couple who seems to never have met before, or nor be aware that they're married.
Excuse me, madam, but it seems to me, unless I'm mistaken, that I've met you somewhere before.
I too, sir. It seems to me I've met you somewhere before.
Once they do realize this, though, they embrace, and Mary, the maid, enters to tell the audience directly that they cannot be married because their daughters have different colored eyes.
My real name is Sherlock Holmes.
Eventually, a fire chief enters, looking for fires, and contributes to the general confusion. Upon his exit, the two couples seem to lose grasp of understandable language entirely, resorting to shouts of monosyllabic words before the stage goes dark, restarting from the beginning, with the Martins this time, as the curtains quietly close in front of them. The play was, funnily enough, based mainly on Ionesco's experience first learning English, through recorded lessons in which characters monotonously report to each other their relationships, what they've done, and obvious things like where the floor and the ceiling are. This influence is one of many leading to the strangeness of the play, and ties it neatly to Ionesco's social commentary on the strangeness of the typical upper-middle-class family. With the play, he determines that this typical family doesn't have the knowledge of themselves enough to create or utilize meaningful language, only surface-level pleasantries or passionate, meaningless outbursts. The connection of language to the understanding of the self is not only tied to all of Ionesco's works, but it's an idea that stood the test of time. Recent political movements across the world have seen global leaders using language to hide fundamental misunderstandings of the self or of current events themselves. I don't know what's more present than that. The Bald Soprano was interpreted by audiences at first as a work of surrealism, which isn't far off. The world is dreamlike and unreal, and clearly rejects everyday logic, but rather than the dreamlike nature stemming from the perception of a character, it instead stems from the playwright himself.
I am so very true that I cannot escape from myself. I organize myself. I am the self that organizes myself, thus arranging the same materials in a unique pattern.
In fact, Ionesco's conviction that the playwright's job is to provide their personal vision of reality began to shift the theatrical form towards a new movement entirely: absurdism. In the early stages, this alienated audiences, and the play wasn't particularly well received by initial viewers. Critics found the characters to be closer to puppets than to people, which was a vivid and very different choice for the time. As Martin Esslin wrote in the Tulane Drama Review in 1960,
Est absurde ce qui n'a pas de but, the definition given by Ionesco in a note on Kafka, certainly applies to the plays of Beckett and Ionesco, but Ionesco's absurdity has its own fantastic knockabout flavor of tragical clowning.
Of course, as Ionesco's career began to develop, and as time has gone on even after his death, the Bald Soprano has become more and more focal in the field of absurdism, with some scholars equaling it with Beckett's Waiting for Godot as a work of absurdist theater. As of 2026, the Bald Soprano has been running at Paris's La Huchette Theater for the past 74 years. Hey, you done? Fine. But do let me know if he says anything absurd again, alright? Okay, we're back. Let's hope it stays that way. In the time we've so kindly skipped, Ionesco studied French at the University of Bucharest, married his former classmate Rodica Borileanu, made a living teaching French in Romania, went to France to write a thesis on poetry, gave up on said thesis, had a daughter, and wrote this first play. Oh, and World War II. After making a few skittish back-and-forth moves between Romania and France, he ducked out of the war with Rodica in Paris, finding that all those around him, including his father and his birth country, seemed to be capitulating to Nazi fascism. Don't worry, we'll come back to that. In that time, he generally avoided the theater, but after putting together and producing The Bald Soprano, Ionesco continued putting his absurdist philosophies on stage. 1951's The Lesson, about a professor whose nightmarish lesson kills his pupil, and 1952's The Chairs, about a dying elderly couple saying goodbye to an audience with no one in it, were both larger hits with audiences. By this time, individuals like Samuel Beckett, Arthur Adamov, and Jean Genet were coming into their own through Ionesco's absurdist lens, and the theater of the absurd became a coined term. Ionesco also began to turn against language as a whole, deciding it was the least possible concern in his plays, and promoting instead the use of specific and vivid directing choices, along with lighting, positioning of actors, and use of set pieces. However, something was brewing up alongside Ionesco's fame: critical disgust. In 1958, Ionesco became embroiled in a debate with English drama critic Kenneth Tynan over the purpose of his plays. Tynan considered Ionesco's work to be nonsense for the sake of nonsense, determining it was useless in a changing theatrical landscape.
When you've seen all of Ionesco's plays, I felt at the end, you've seen one of them.
Ouch. Ionesco, though standing his ground, did end up hurt enough by these critiques that he shifted his style towards more politically or socially charged narratives for a time. At around the same time, Ionesco introduced something new to his plays, the near self-insert protagonist, Béranger. First appearing in 1958's The Killer, the character appeared in a total of 4 plays by Ionesco, also including 1959's Rhinoceros, 1962's A Stroll in the Air, and one more that we'll get to. This is the backbone of our evidence in this case. Béranger's got some dirt on him, and we actually have footage of his track through Ionesco's plays. Now, I'll present to you exhibit... What? We don't have it? What do you mean we don't have it? What are What are we supposed to do with the footage? That was kind of... Puppets? No. Just because he said puppets earlier does not mean we're gonna...
Alright, so, in The Killer, Béranger arrives in the Radiant City, this futuristic place where everything's under control, except, of course, for a killer, the killer, who haunts the streets, luring people into killing distance by offering them a look at the Colonel's photo, whatever that means. Soon into the visit, the architect's secretary, Danny, who Béranger happens to be hopelessly attracted to, is killed by the killer, and Béranger begins a quest to avenge her.
It can't go on. We must do something. We must.
After 2 acts of intrigue in and outside the city, Berenger stumbles upon the killer, a scrawny, one-eyed old man, and
Oh, how weak my strength is against your cold determination.
gives up? He lets the killer approach as the lights go out, but things are okay because there are 3 more plays. In the next play, Rhinoceros, a rhinoceros charges through the center of a small French town. There's also a logician here, awfully reminiscent of the families of the bald soprano. Berenger has become apathetic, hardly noticing that the people of the town he lives in are slowly beginning to turn into rhinoceroses until his close friend Jean begins to turn as well.
I'm sick of moral standards. We need to go beyond moral standards.
Other friends begin to turn, praising the rhinoceroses as godlike and lovable before charging Berenger after their metamorphosis. Eventually, his lover Daisy turns as well, and the only human left in town defending himself from the horde, Berenger still refuses to change.
I am not capitulating!
And that's the play. In the less famous third play, A Stroll in the Air, Berenger gains the ability to fly and... Wait, hold on. Let's go back a bit, and let's get out of this box.
Oh, thank goodness that's over with, right? Now, we need to hone in on Rhinoceros, or Die Nationer, as it was originally presented. Created in the height of the Tynan debate, the play is Ionesco's main response to being challenged on matters of politics and meaning. Berenger, who in The Killer was proven to be driven by love and a powerful understanding of human nature, is still driven by a love of his fellow humans, but is scared by the loss of his people rather than driven to avenge them. This is no bald soprano. This isn't a story simply identifying the absurdities of a social group. This is more clearly focused on the fanatical rise of ideas and their effects on people. Rhinoceritis, as it's called, being a willful infection, allows the capitulation of Berenger's friends to be a much harsher choice. See? Told you we'd come back to that. In a world full of fanatical ideas, Ionesco sought to bring forward the effects of such a monstrous shift to wider audiences. And he succeeded, especially by way of implementing elements of himself and his deeper life into his work.
I go round and round in my cage behind the bars like a wild animal.
Ionesco's works skyrocketed in popularity, with Rhinoceros itself receiving a Broadway run. Volumes of his works began to be published more frequently, and he was even asked to join the upper-crust intellectual societies of France on the back of Rhinoceros's success, which Ionesco refused. From this point, the latter half of the 20th century approaches. Bertolt Brecht's form of drama, focused more on words and their inherent meaning than ever before, took its place on European stages, and both Brechtian critics and bourgeois critics turned against Ionesco's absurdist style, with both sides ousting him from their ranks. However, Ionesco, this time, took this in stride, continued probing deeper into himself, and wrote works like Hunger and Thirst and Man with Bags, which are deeply introspective, but notably less popular. As Peter Thompson writes in his article, Games and Plays,
reading the main and most recent piece, Hunger and Thirst, was a struggle almost uninterrupted by delight. Has Ionesco changed? Has the climate? Have I?
His health deteriorating, he began to double down on his perspectives on artistic freedom, often taking part in gatherings or conferences on the subject. I feel that the best example of this introspection and refinement of values is actually from 1962, the start of this movement of Ionesco's career, the final piece of the Berenger quadrilogy I kept hidden from you. I present to you Exhibit C, Le Roi se meurt, or Exit the King.
When I was writing Le Roi se meurt, I knew only that I wanted to describe the agony of a dying man, and that this agony represented in some obscure way perishing modern values. What I read in the papers made me angry, and somehow it all crystallized around the central theme of the agony of a king.
Originally conceptualized as a ballet, Exit the King is one long scene in which we see the final moments of King Berenger I. His kingdom is falling apart, and even the universe seems to be deteriorating as his wives, Queen Marguerite and Queen Marie, lose hope of his survival.
Snow is falling on the north pole of the sun. The Milky Way seems to be curdling. The comet is exhausted, feeling its age, winding its tail around itself and curling up like a dying dog.
Just as his wives and his royal retinue begin to understand the ramifications of his death, the king appears, completely oblivious to what's happening to him or his kingdom. Queen Marguerite, the most cynical of the entourage, enlightens both Berenger and the audience to what is about to occur.
You're going to die in an hour and a half. You're going to die at the end of the show.
Still, Berenger doesn't accept what is to come. While Queen Marguerite and the royal physician present the facts of the situation, Queen Marie fights to shield Berenger from the truth. Eventually, as more and more pieces of evidence collect against his denial, the king must admit his frailty.
I'm dying. I can't. I'm dying. I'm coming to an end.
Even so, this acceptance doesn't help his state. In a manner almost reminiscent of the 15th century play Everyman, all of his retinue slowly leaves him behind.
Forgive me, Your Majesty, I must go. I'm afraid I have to. I'm very sorry, please forgive me.
The doctor retires. He goes out bowing, like a marionette.
Eventually, only Béranger and Queen Marguerite remain. She directs him to move and speak, but as he becomes more frail, he struggles to respond. In the end, he sits on his throne one last time before fading away into mist. Sad, right? Well, even so, farcical elements throughout the play remind us that this is still a work of Ionesco's creation.
Long live the king!
The king falls down again.
The king is dead!
So, that's Exit the King. You see what I'm talking about here, right? More introspective. Ionesco reworks his everyman, his self-insert protagonist, as someone who hurts and fears, someone who cannot comprehend the nature of his own death.
Why choose a king to describe the dying process? Because to be born and to live is to take possession of the world.
Up until now, Béranger has been representative of Ionesco, if only because he represents everyone. Béranger was pedestrian. He was driven by love and attraction and sometimes vengeance, but he became driven by something greater. When he knew his time was up, he was suddenly a king, surrounded by his past deeds and connections. In a world shaped in part by his own contributions, he had to navigate his own ego and disbelief to realize himself fully. As the world around Ionesco became stranger and stranger, further from the quaint country town he knew as a child, or even the Western Europe he came to hate as an adult, he became more and more entangled with it. The strangeness became something internal. But while it's prevalent, there's one element here that cannot be explained. Why do these plays seem to use movement over words to convey this strangeness? There's hardly an explanation. I mean, even the comic parts of Exit the King, which should by all means be tragic, are driven by movement. Beyond the bald soprano, it's impossible to know why... Oh, now that's absurd. Not again. I thought I might have to come back. Should we just show him? I figure we should.
Est-ce que vous avez vu du théâtre très jeune? Est-ce que vous avez des souvenirs de théâtre?
Oui.
Est-ce que ça vous a emballé le théâtre? Est-ce que ça vous a émerveillé?
Un certain théâtre, un seul théâtre m'a emballé vraiment, c'était le Guignol. Et j'étais avec ma mère justement au Luxembourg, il y a le Guignol. Je me souviens encore, de vers 4 ans, 5 ans. Et alors j'étais là, et puis tous les enfants riaient autour de moi. Ils riaient, moi je ne riais pas. Ma mère croyait que je m'ennuyais, elle voulait me faire sortir de là, mais non, je n'étais pas ennuyé du tout, mais j'étais absolument interloqué, j'étais ahuri, j'étais pris. Et puis après, oui, alors je n'ai plus rien aimé au théâtre.
Plus rien aimé? Plus
rien aimé au théâtre. Et quand j'ai commencé à en faire, j'ai fait une sorte de Guignol. La cantatrice chauve, c'est une sorte de Guignol. Le théâtre, c'est pour moi, doit être pour moi en fait très simple, très simplifié, très grotesque.
Avec une sorte de mécanisme, comme si quelqu'un tirait les ficelles un peu.
C'est le monde qui me semble être comme cela.
I get it. I really think I get it. Puppets. Huh. That's really what it's been about this whole time. Okay, so if I'm putting all this together correctly, they've been puppets all along. Ionesco realized that the upper class was made up of puppets, so he wrote The Bald Soprano. Then he was faced with World War II, and the people around him became puppets for a terrible cause, so he wrote Rhinoceros. Then he realized he was just as much a puppet as anyone else, so he wrote Exit the King, a man finally discovering himself fully as he comes closer to death. Eugene Ionesco died March 28, 1994, at the age of 84. He's buried in Paris at Montparnasse Cemetery. The only thing to do now is evaluate his works for what they are to us today, become our own Tynans, or rather our own Goethes. Yes, Johann Wolfgang von Goethe's questions for art criticism. That's it. You know what those are, right? Sure you do. You'll pick them up as we go along. 1. What was the artist trying to do? Let's think back to Ionesco's self-proclaimed responsibility as a playwright. He claimed that it was his responsibility to provide his perspective on reality, a perspective on reality shaped by his early life across 2 countries, watching the rise of fascism firsthand and ultimately witnessing the death of the world he knew. As he developed his work, he began to focus the tenets of existentialism into further formulating what would become absurdism.
Humor is lucidity. We're unhappy, that's undeniable. We've been put in this world in this shit without having been consulted. What's left for us except to laugh a little?
2. How well did the artist do it? As we've seen, it's yes across the board. Estlin argues that Ionesco helped to form and reinvent absurdism in his essay. Responses from individuals like Thompson and Tynan identify that Ionesco continually alienated his audiences with this form of writing, with his strange use of perspective, but ultimately, this alienation was necessary to achieve his goal. As Bernard Ducour writes in Educational Theatre Journal,
form and content are so interrelated that these highly unorthodox plays possess an artistic unity which would hardly have been attained had Ionesco poured his subject matter into an orthodox form.
3. Was it worth it? I absolutely think so. Without Ionesco's form of absurdism, and without the theater of the absurd that Ionesco helped to create, we wouldn't have any of the art forms that we have to this day. Following that point, we wouldn't have gotten Brecht's superrealism, so focused on words, if we didn't have people coming before him distrusting language to begin with. Beyond that, ask La Huchette. Ask the Société des Auteurs, who awarded Ionesco the grand prize for theater. Ask the Académie Française, yes, that Académie Française, who inducted Ionesco in 1971. That's it. Things that were once absurdities are now truths. I call that unraveling a mystery. Case closed. Our own Goethes. Yes! Johann Wolfgang. Estlin's article, which Ionesco had a hand in, is regarded as a sentimental work. It's not sentimental. His health deteriorating, he began to double down on his